When I was younger, I thought vulnerability was something to avoid at all costs. It felt like walking around with your armor off, exposing yourself to judgment, rejection, and failure. To me, being vulnerable meant being weak. I believed that strength meant keeping my emotions in check, always having the right answers, and never letting anyone see me struggle. But over the years, life has taught me a profound truth: vulnerability is not weakness, it's courage. And it's one of the most powerful tools we have to live a wholehearted life. Think about the moments that truly matter in life. They're often the ones where you took a risk, where the outcome wasn't guaranteed. Maybe it was confessing your feelings to someone you cared about, applying for a job you weren't sure you'd get, or sharing a part of yourself you normally keep hidden. Those moments are vulnerable because they come with uncertainty and risk. But they're also the moments where real connection, growth, and authenticity are born. Here's what I've come to understand: vulnerability is the birthplace of courage. It's easy to play it safe, to stay within the lines, and to avoid putting ourselves out there. But courage doesn't come from comfort, it comes from stepping into the unknown, even when we're scared. It's not about being fearless, it's about showing up despite the fear. And that's what vulnerability requires. It asks us to be real, to be seen, and to risk failure or rejection in pursuit of something meaningful. Let's not sugarcoat it: vulnerability is uncomfortable. It's messy and awkward, and sometimes it feels like the ground might swallow you whole. But avoiding it doesn't protect us, it isolates us. When we build walls to keep vulnerability out, we also keep out connection, intimacy, and joy. We end up protecting ourselves from the very things that make life worth living. I remember a time when I had to embrace vulnerability in a way that terrified me. I was working on a project that I deeply cared about, but I knew it wasn't perfect. I was afraid to share it, fearing criticism and judgment. But I also knew that if I kept it to myself, it would never have a chance to grow. So I took a deep breath and put it out there. The response wasn't perfect. Some people offered feedback that stung, but others connected with my work in ways I couldn't have imagined. That experience taught me that vulnerability isn't about guaranteeing a perfect outcome, it's about showing up and giving yourself permission to be seen, imperfections and all. One of the most powerful aspects of vulnerability is how it creates connection. When we're willing to be vulnerable, we give others permission to do the same. Think about the relationships in your life that feel the most meaningful. Chances are, they're the ones where you can be your truest self, where you don't have to pretend or hide. That kind of connection only happens when we're brave enough to show up authentically. Vulnerability also fosters growth. It's hard to learn and evolve when we're stuck in the illusion of perfection. Being vulnerable allows us to admit when we don't know something, to ask for help, and to acknowledge our mistakes. It's in those moments of humility and openness that we gain the wisdom and strength to move forward. I wish I had understood this sooner. Vulnerability doesn't make you weak, it makes you human. And it's in our shared humanity, our struggles, fears, and hopes that we find strength. Every time you choose to be vulnerable, you're choosing courage over comfort, connection over isolation, authenticity over perfection. It's not easy, but it's worth it. Because at the end of the day, living a wholehearted life means showing up as your true self, even when it's hard, and trusting that who you are is enough. There's a voice many of us carry inside, a whisper that says, "You're not enough." It's subtle, but it's persistent. It shows up when we compare ourselves to others, when we fall short of our goals, or when life doesn't go as planned. It tells us that our worth is conditional, tied to what we achieve, how we look, or how perfectly we can perform. For years, I listened to that voice, and it shaped so much of how I saw myself and how I showed up in the world. But here's the truth I wish I'd known all along: you are worthy right here, right now. Not because of what you've done or what you will do, but simply because you exist. The lie of conditional worthiness is one of the most toxic myths we internalize. We grow up believing that our value is something we have to earn, that it's tied to our grades, our job titles, our relationships, or the approval of others. We think, I'll feel worthy when I get that promotion, or I'll be enough once I lose this weight. But the problem with conditional worthiness is that it's a moving target. No matter what you achieve, there's always another condition waiting. The cycle never ends. And so we live in this exhausting race to prove ourselves, chasing the illusion of perfection and constantly measuring ourselves against impossible standards. We silence our true selves, afraid that our imperfections will render us unlovable or unworthy. But the truth is, our worth was never meant to be measured by external metrics. It's inherent, unchanging, and unconditional. I remember a moment in my own life when this realization hit me. I was in the middle of a period where nothing seemed to be going right. My work felt uninspired, my relationships were strained, and I was stuck in a loop of self-doubt. I kept telling myself if only I could get it together, then I'd feel good about myself. But one day, a friend said something that stopped me in my tracks. She looked me in the eye and said, "You do realize you're enough as you are, don't you?" At first, I brushed it off. But those words lingered, and slowly I started to let them sink in. What if my worth wasn't something I had to earn? What if it was already there, waiting for me to claim it? That question changed everything. I began to understand that my imperfections didn't diminish my value, they were part of what made me human. I realized that being worthy didn't mean being perfect, it meant showing up, flaws and all, and believing that I was enough just as I was. This shift didn't happen overnight. It took practice and patience. I had to unlearn years of messaging that told me my worth was tied to what I could do or how I looked. I had to learn to challenge that critical inner voice and replace it with compassion. And most importantly, I had to stop waiting for some future version of myself to feel worthy and start embracing who I was in the present. When you stop tying your worth to external things, something incredible happens. You begin to live more freely and authentically. You stop making decisions based on fear or the need for approval, and you start making them from a place of self-respect and self-love. You give yourself permission to try, to fail, and to grow, knowing that none of it changes your inherent value. You start to see yourself not as a project to be fixed, but as a whole and worthy person, just as you are. You don't have to wait to feel worthy. You don't have to earn it or prove it or fight for it. It's already yours. And when you begin to believe that, your life opens up in ways you never imagined. You show up differently in your relationships, your work, and your dreams. You stop hiding. You stop holding back. You start to live fully and unapologetically, knowing that who you are is enough right here, right now. Failure is a word that can make your stomach drop. It's something many of us fear deeply, something we go out of our way to avoid. We're taught from a young age that failure is bad, that it's a sign we're not good enough, or that we don't have what it takes. The truth, though, is that failure isn't the end of the road. It's not a verdict on your abilities or your future. Instead, failure is a teacher, one of the most valuable and transformative you'll ever encounter if you're willing to learn from it. When you fail, it's easy to let shame take over. That inner voice whispers, "See, you weren't good enough. You shouldn't have even tried." It's tempting to listen to that voice, to retreat and play small, to convince yourself that you're safer if you never risk failure again. But playing small doesn't protect you, it limits you. It keeps you from experiencing growth, creativity, and resilience. It prevents you from becoming the person you're meant to be. Failure has a way of forcing us to confront the things we might not otherwise examine. It shines a light on our blind spots and challenges us to think differently. It teaches us humility, reminding us that we're human and that no one gets it right all the time. It pushes us to adapt, to try again with new strategies, new insights, and a deeper understanding of ourselves and the world around us. I remember a time when I poured my heart into a project, convinced it would be a success. I had spent months planning, preparing, and fine-tuning every detail. But when the moment came, it flopped. People didn't respond the way I'd hoped, and I felt the sting of rejection and disappointment. At first, I wanted to hide from it. I wanted to forget it had ever happened and move on without really looking at what went wrong. But I realized that if I didn't face it, I would miss the opportunity to grow. So I sat with my failure. I looked at it not as a reflection of my worth, but as a puzzle to be solved. What had I overlooked? What could I do differently next time? And as I worked through those questions, I realized that failure wasn't the end of the story, it was the beginning of a new chapter. The lessons I learned from that experience shaped my next steps in ways that success never could have. They made me braver, smarter, and more resilient. Failure also teaches you about courage. It's easy to succeed when everything is going your way, but it takes real strength to keep going after you've fallen. When you choose to get back up, you're building a kind of inner grit that no amount of success can give you. You're proving to yourself that you're not defined by your setbacks, that you're capable of facing challenges and coming out stronger on the other side. Another gift of failure is empathy. When you've experienced your own setbacks, you understand the struggles of others more deeply. You become less judgmental and more compassionate because you know how it feels to try and fall short. That empathy strengthens your relationships and deepens your connections with the people around you. One of the most important things to remember about failure is that it's not a final destination. It's a moment, a chapter, a stepping stone. It doesn't mean you're stuck, it means you're learning. Some of the greatest achievements in history were built on the foundations of failure. Thomas Edison famously said, "I have not failed. I've just found 10,000 ways that won't work." His perseverance and willingness to learn from every misstep led to the creation of the light bulb, a reminder that failure is often part of the process of success. So the next time you fail, don't let it break you. Let it teach you. Let it shape you into someone who is braver, wiser, and more compassionate. Remember that failure isn't a reflection of your worth, it's a reflection of your willingness to try. And that willingness to show up, to risk, and to learn is what will ultimately lead you to success. Failure isn't the end of your story, it's just one of the chapters. And what comes next is entirely up to you. For much of my life, I misunderstood what boundaries were. I thought they were walls you put up to keep people out or something you used when you were angry or tired of someone. I believed that saying no or setting limits was selfish and that love meant saying yes even when it cost you your peace. But as time went on, I realized that boundaries aren't about shutting people out, they're about letting the right kind of love in. Boundaries aren't an act of rejection, they're an act of love for yourself and for others. It can be hard to set boundaries, especially when you care about the people in your life. You might worry that saying no will make you seem selfish, unkind, or ungrateful. Maybe you've been taught to prioritize others' needs over your own or to avoid conflict at all costs. But here's what I've learned: when you say yes to things that hurt or overwhelm you, you're not being loving. You're sacrificing your well-being. And that's not sustainable. Healthy relationships can only thrive when there's mutual respect, and boundaries are how you communicate that respect for yourself and the other person. Setting a boundary is an act of clarity. It's about letting people know what you need to be your best self in the relationship. It's not about controlling or punishing others. It's about taking responsibility for your own needs and limits. When you're clear about your boundaries, you're giving people a roadmap for how to treat you. You're saying, this is what works for me and this is what doesn't. It might feel uncomfortable at first, but in the long run, it makes your relationships healthier and more honest. One of the hardest parts of boundaries is dealing with the guilt that often comes with them. You might think, if I really cared, I'd say yes. But the truth is, constantly saying yes when you mean no leads to resentment. And resentment is a silent toxin in relationships. It builds up over time, and eventually it creates a wall between you and the other person. By saying no when you need to, you're actually protecting the relationship. You're ensuring that your yeses come from a place of genuine love, not obligation or burnout. Boundaries are also an act of love because they teach others how to value you. When you set and honor your boundaries, you're modeling self-respect. You're showing people that you take yourself seriously and that you expect the same from them. This doesn't mean you'll always get it right or that everyone will respond well. Some people might push back, especially if they've been used to you always saying yes. But the people who truly care about you will respect your boundaries, even if it takes them time to adjust. It's important to remember that boundaries aren't just about saying no. They're also about saying yes to what truly matters. When you set boundaries around your time, energy, and emotional capacity, you create space for the things and people who align with your values and goals. You're choosing to spend your resources in ways that nourish and uplift you. And that's an act of love, not just for yourself, but for everyone in your life. When you take care of yourself, you're better able to show up fully for the people and things you care about. I learned this the hard way. For years, I said yes to everything and everyone, thinking it was the right thing to do. I overextended myself, stretched thin trying to meet everyone's expectations, and slowly lost touch with my own needs. It wasn't until I hit a breaking point that I realized something had to change. Learning to set boundaries was one of the most challenging but rewarding lessons of my life. It taught me that love isn't about giving until you're empty, it's about giving from a place of fullness. When you set boundaries, you're choosing love over resentment, clarity over confusion, and respect over exhaustion. You're honoring yourself and giving others the opportunity to do the same. Boundaries don't take away from love, they strengthen it. They create the space for relationships to grow in healthy, authentic ways. So the next time you hesitate to set a boundary, remember it's not an act of selfishness, it's an act of love. Every day, whether we realize it or not, we tell ourselves stories. These stories aren't just the things we say out loud, they're the thoughts we replay in our minds, the interpretations we make about what's happening around us, and the beliefs we hold about who we are and what we're capable of. These stories are powerful. They shape the way we see ourselves, how we interact with others, and how we move through the world. What I've learned is that the stories you tell yourself can either build you up or hold you back. The good news? You get to choose the narrative. Think about the last time something didn't go the way you planned. Maybe you missed a deadline, had a conflict with someone, or felt left out. What did you tell yourself about that experience? Did you think, I always mess things up, or no one cares about me? Or did you say, this is a tough moment, but I'll figure it out, or this doesn't define me? The story you chose to tell yourself in that moment likely shaped how you felt and how you responded. The stories we tell ourselves often start in childhood. They come from experiences, messages we receive from others, and how we make sense of the world as young people. For example, if you grew up being praised only when you achieved something, you might tell yourself a story like, my worth depends on my accomplishments. If you were criticized for expressing your feelings, you might develop a story like, it's not safe to share how I feel. Over time, these narratives become ingrained, and we carry them into adulthood without questioning whether they're true. The trouble with these stories is that they often go unexamined. We accept them as facts when they're really just interpretations. And because our brains like consistency, we tend to seek out evidence that supports the stories we already believe. If your story is, I'm not good enough, you'll likely focus on every mistake you make and overlook your successes. If your story is, I'll never find love, you might interpret a single rejection as proof that you're unlovable, even when it's not true. These stories create a self-fulfilling cycle, reinforcing beliefs that hold you back. But here's the empowering part. You don't have to stick with the story you've been telling yourself. You can rewrite it. It starts with awareness, paying attention to the narratives running through your mind and asking yourself, is this true? Is this helpful? Often you'll find that the stories you're clinging to are outdated, incomplete, or based on fear rather than reality. When you challenge those stories, you open up the possibility for a new narrative, one that empowers you instead of limiting you. Rewriting your story doesn't mean ignoring hard truths or pretending everything is perfect. It means shifting your perspective and choosing a narrative that supports your growth. For example, instead of saying, I failed, so I must be a failure, you could say, this didn't work out, but I can learn from it and try again. Instead of telling yourself, I'm too shy to connect with people, you could say, I'm learning to step out of my comfort zone, and that's courageous. Small shifts in the way you frame your story can have a big impact on your confidence, resilience, and outlook. This practice has been life-changing for me. For years, I carried a story that I wasn't creative. I told myself that I didn't have the right kind of mind for artistic work. So I avoided anything that felt like it might challenge that belief. But one day, I decided to question that story. I asked myself, who says I'm not creative? What if I just try? That small shift led me to experiment with new projects, and to my surprise, I discovered a creative side I never knew I had. Changing the story I told myself didn't just change how I saw myself, it changed what I was willing to try and ultimately what I was capable of achieving. The stories you tell yourself are powerful, but they're not set in stone. You have the ability to examine them, challenge them, and rewrite them. When you choose stories that align with your strengths, your potential, and your resilience, you open up a world of possibilities. Life is unpredictable, and there will always be moments that challenge you. But the way you frame those moments, the stories you tell about them, will shape how you rise from them. Remember, you're the author of your life, and you can always pick up the pen and start a new chapter. For so much of life, we're taught to chase the big things. The promotions, the milestones, the once-in-a-lifetime experiences. We're told that joy is waiting for us at the top of the mountain. And if we just work hard enough, achieve enough, or plan well enough, we'll finally feel it. But here's the truth that often takes years to sink in. Joy isn't something reserved for the grand achievements or the perfect moments. It's woven into the small, seemingly ordinary experiences of everyday life. And the more we learn to notice those moments, the richer our lives become. Think about a time when you felt truly joyful. Maybe it was a quiet morning sipping your favorite coffee, the warmth of the mug in your hands, and the comforting stillness around you. Maybe it was the sound of a loved one's laughter, the kind that makes your heart feel lighter. Or maybe it was the moment you looked up at the sky, caught off guard by the colors of a sunset. These moments aren't flashy or monumental, but they have a way of filling us with a sense of peace and connection that big achievements often can't replicate. The problem with tying joy to grand achievements is that those moments are few and far between. Yes, graduating from school, landing a dream job, or celebrating a big win can feel incredible. But those experiences don't happen every day. And when they do, the joy they bring often fades quickly. We work so hard to get to the peak, only to realize that the satisfaction is fleeting, and soon we're looking for the next mountain to climb. If we only allow ourselves to feel joy when we achieve something big, we spend most of our lives waiting for happiness instead of living it. The joy in the small moments, on the other hand, is always available. It doesn't require a big plan or a perfect outcome. It's about being present and open to the beauty that already exists around us. It's about noticing the way the sunlight streams through your window in the morning, the way a kind word from a stranger can brighten your day, or the way your favorite song can instantly lift your mood. These moments might seem insignificant, but they're what make life truly meaningful. What's even more powerful is that finding joy in the small moments doesn't just make you happier, it changes the way you approach life. When you stop chasing after the next big thing and start noticing the small joys, you become more grounded. You're less likely to measure your worth by your achievements and more likely to appreciate what you already have. You realize that happiness isn't something you earn, it's something you choose to embrace, moment by moment. It's not always easy, especially in a world that celebrates busyness and accomplishment. It can feel counterintuitive to pause and savor the small things when there's so much pressure to keep pushing forward. But slowing down to notice those moments isn't a waste of time, it's a way to reclaim your life. It's a reminder that joy isn't something you find at the end of a checklist, it's something you create by being present. I remember a time when I was caught up in chasing big goals, convinced that happiness would come once I reached the next milestone. But no matter how much I achieved, the joy never lasted. It wasn't until I started paying attention to the small things, the quiet moments of connection with loved ones, the beauty of nature, the simple pleasure of doing something I loved, that I realized joy had been with me all along. I just hadn't been looking for it in the right places. The truth is, life is made up of small moments. The big milestones, while important, are only a tiny fraction of our time. Learning to find joy in the everyday allows us to live fully, even when things aren't perfect. It helps us see that joy isn't about having everything we want, it's about appreciating what we have. It's about laughing at an unexpected joke, feeling the comfort of a hug, or savoring a delicious meal. These moments might seem ordinary, but they're what make life extraordinary. Joy doesn't wait for perfect timing or grand achievements. It's in the here and now, waiting to be noticed. When you start to see it in the small things, you realize that you don't need to chase it, it's already yours. And that's the real beauty of it. Joy isn't something you achieve, it's something you live.